Good morning and happy Thursday, party people. I'm Hank Hudson and welcome back to the Blockchain Report. We've got a special show today because the 2025 Digital Asset Summit is happening live from New York City. It's a huge day for crypto and we're here to break it all down for you. Joining us this morning is Nolan, host of The Great Awakening here at Roxham TV, helping us unpack everything as we tune into major speakers, including Michael Saylor, CEO of MicroStrategy, now Strategy, and hold on to your seats, President Donald Trump, who'll be delivering a Bitcoin policy update. That's right, Trump and Bitcoin, orange man, orange coin, aren't you glad you tuned in this morning? We'll be watching live, keeping it fun and easy to understand. You can catch the stream at Roxham TV on X or Roxham TV on YouTube or directly at roxham.tv. Let's dive in and welcome Nolan to the show. Nolan, how are you this morning? Pumped to have you here.
Hi, Hank. Thanks for the great intro. That was great. I like the. I never heard of the orange. You glad you made it. You surprised me. Orange coin, orange guy. That works. But then you added one more, so it was a lot of fun.
Oh, you know, every now and then I try to throw a little curveball in there for the viewers at home, and I got lucky this morning. It just came to me. So, yeah.
You got the energy, man. You got the energy. It's morning for you. You also host the morning show. You just happen to be on the Pacific Coast.
Yeah, they're early ones here. We get up at like 4 for this bad boy. So, you know, I just mainline coffee in the morning to keep this energy
you're like
up.
Trump doesn't sleep apparently. So we're going to hear about the guy who doesn't sleep, just like Bitcoin doesn't sleep, right?
It really doesn't. And we might be getting some exciting news on that today. And for those people tuning in that might not be familiar with the Digital Asset Summit, could you tell us a little bit about what it is and what should we be expecting this morning from that?
Yeah, so the Digital Asset Summit comes from the guys at Blockworks. I actually appear weekly on a Blockworks show called Supply Shock with Pete Rizzo. So Blockworks kind of grew up in New York City around the 2017 period. They originally worked with Anthony Popliano. They were pushing out podcasts. They're one of the original, let's say, podcast media groups in the place and in the industry. They started to create events alongside that. Now, I worked with CoinDesk in those days, so we had at the time Consensus, one of the biggest events in the space. But we really abdicated at CoinDesk the New York City spot. We originally built the event and CoinDesk itself out of New York City, Blockworks also in New York City. But CoinDesk moved to Austin, Texas to do its event for many years, and they'll be in Toronto this year. And so that kind of left a void in New York City. New York City doesn't really have a huge industry event anymore. And Blockworks, a New York City-based media operation, has swooped in to fill that void. And here they are. They've been doing these events for a while. They were specifically targeted at Wall Street. They've always been targeted to the Wall Street audience. It's not really a, if you go back to the way these events worked, originally they really were sort of computer science engineering shows. The original CoinDesk shows were really focused on the cryptography side of things, the computer science side of things. We actually invented the idea of a Wall Street show back then, a Wall Street crypto Bitcoin show. And these guys have gone extreme into that direction, and it makes sense, of course, right? Bitcoin is beyond just the cryptographic protocols. It's beyond just the computer science behind it. We've gone deep into the economics, deep into the game theory, deep into the nation state accumulation stage of the game theory. So of course, the human migration we've seen in the history of these events, right? Of course, Bitcoin began with the cryptographers. I would say the political people were sort of second to come into the industry. They really did start to come with the Ron Paul 2012 campaign. Donald Trump sounding a lot like Ron Paul 2012 a lot these days. He comes out with a lot of Ron Paul type stuff from 2012 campaign. That was a major injection of human capital into the industry. Smart people left their professional jobs to come into Bitcoin. The cryptographers were first, the engineers were first, and then from there it went to the political people. The Wall Street people came next. They were the first sort of unsentimental people that were interested in the industry. They weren't there for the politics. They weren't there for the game theory necessarily. They were there to make some money, to do some real risk and real trading and stuff like that. So here we are coming full circle. Not only are political operatives, political professionals joining, the actual president of the United States has something to say at a Wall Street show. So you're seeing the layers.
Yeah, speaking, I mean, we've got this coming up in a second. Donald Trump is supposed to make some kind of announcement about Bitcoin policy going forward. And I think it's just going to be taking here in just a sec. So guys, are we going to go to that really quick so we can take a peek? I think it's going to be happening here any second now. Okay, so there, yeah, I think they said 7:40. So we should be rolling here in a sec. So what are you kind of expecting from that, from the Don, Nolan? I mean, do you feel like it's more of what we've already heard, or do you think we might actually be hearing something new today? Or is this them just showing face as part of the new crypto front in America begins? What do you think?
I think it's a bit of, let's call it backfilling. So a lot of mystery was left with what happened 2 weeks ago when he had everyone over there. And then in the meantime, we found out that the revenue neutral ways of acquiring Bitcoin were actually a priority, right? That this was going to be something they were focused on. A lot of people have been guessing for the last 2 weeks. So I imagine it's not so much anything terribly new, but it is a lot of backfill and specificity from what we've heard Bo Hines mention yesterday. They're going to aggressively acquire Bitcoin. So I think it's along the lines of strategies to acquire more Bitcoin. I do have a feeling that, Donald Trump won the Max Kaiser Bitcoin Employee of the Month award. I don't expect he's going to be talking about winning it, but we're going to see why he was the Bitcoin Employee of the Month. Of course, Donald Trump working for all Bitcoiners out there selling Bitcoin. He's a consummate salesperson. I doubt we're going to be let down. I think there is going to be some sales pitch. And by that, I simply mean we're going to get a little more direction, a little more specificity, a little more backfill on what happened 2 weeks ago, bridging the gap between what's real now. I think we've heard a lot of the persuasion. I think Donald Trump was coming in to just sort of tie the loop on that to make those rumors seem more real. It might be a little bit of a timeline situation, right, about when the actual Cynthia Lummis bill will become enshrined. We saw Tom Emmer, the Republican whip, yesterday at this event saying that he believes that this Congress, particular Congress now, so that means the one before the midterms, the 2026 midterms will actually be the Congress that passes the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve bill. I think we are going to get an audit. A lot of people have been talking about that. I think that's probably too boring for the Max Kaiser Bitcoin Employee of the Month to talk about. I think it is going to be about aggressive strategies. And it will be followed up exactly with Michael Saylor. And Michael Saylor reminding us all, this is a point that none of us realized, of course, that Michael Saylor mentioning that this is the first asset that a president has endorsed in ever. There's never been another asset that a president said, go and buy this, do this, this is good.
Except, of course, for the new Model S Tesla, I think we're forgetting.
Well, yeah, I did like that video. I don't know if you saw it. Come on down to the White House Tesla dealership. We got deals. Everything's computer.
Yeah, he was like, a lot of computers in here. He sounded like my grandmother. But yeah, that was pretty wild. Do you think with Trump coming out and like if he's going to reiterate kind of what we've already heard from Cynthia Lummis, do you think that'll move the needle anymore? Because it's one thing to hear that from a senator, but then to hear the leader of the free world say it, do you think that will kind of push the Bitcoin needle a little further ahead than we saw with Cynthia?
Yeah, I think so. But again, I think it's such a big change. I remember Peter Thiel on Joe Rogan this summer talking about they talked about Bitcoin for a second. And the way they described it, I'll describe it in two different, because it applies to two different things. It applies both to Bitcoin and the US debt currently. It's just kind of too big to get your mind around, right? It's just too much for some people. It's such a big change, Bitcoin, that one president saying something isn't quite enough. Even a president, even someone like Donald Trump. So maybe you might get a little bit of a bounce or something like that. But long term here, we are talking about a complete reorientation of the US financial system. We are talking about ending something and beginning something new. We're talking about hyperbitcoinization and all of the rewiring that has to do with, really even American psychology, right? We are talking about psychological commodities here. The US dollar is a psychological commodity, and it's starting to show signs of inducing mental illness. We see all these people burning stuff. And we got a major mental illness problem in America, and money has a lot to do with it, right? We all love money. And when you're in an unhealthy relationship with money, these are the types of things that ends up happening. So And it's the same as the debt. So just like Peter Thiel mentioned that the size of change that Bitcoin offers is almost too much for the human mind to just look at and say, oh, check, check, we're just going to change everything. Okay, got it. The debt problem is in a similar vein. And the problem is just so staggeringly large that you can't just look at it and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. So we're dealing with things that are a little bit beyond even the 200 IQs, let alone the 80 IQ psycho plebs that love Bitcoin. So we've got probably still a long way to go, right? There's still more things that'll have to happen. But we're knocking on the door here of hyperbitcoinization. We're knocking on the door of a complete and total American upgrade in our worldview, based really on don't trust, verify, really sort of mimetically being propagated around the world. I did my show this morning a lot about that, and Donald Trump has had a lot to do with Americans understanding the Bitcoin meme. Probably the second meme that you come across in Bitcoin, right? The 21 million cap is probably the first meme that you end up running in your understanding of Bitcoin and then applying to your worldview. I think even more importantly, though, is the don't trust, verify meme. We understood it with elections, right? We understood that if you can't audit an election, did you have an election? I mean, obviously
Right.
no. Bitcoiners will say no, it never happened, right? We might have performed something that looked like an election, but if you can't audit, and I'd apply that to every election we've had, including the 2024 election, right?
Hmm.
Don't trust, verify. If you can't audit these elections, then what really happened? So in the case of Bitcoiners, we've understood this for a long time. And I think hear Donald Trump today, whether it's auditing how much Bitcoin we actually have, whether it's auditing the federal the Fort Knox that he's talked about, our ability to not trust and verify is going to become more and more integral to our own worldview as Americans, as citizens of the world, and as Bitcoiners. So it's spreading. That's really where I see Donald Trump's main sales job here is the don't trust, verify meme and how important that is.
Absolutely. And let me ask you this question. With the United States now kind of coming out, I mean, I don't think we've actually heard it from Don Juan himself, but saying, hey, we're going to be actively trying to acquire more Bitcoin. And they said it won't cost anything to, citizens of the United States. But do you think there will come a time where they start putting more liquidity in the system by printing more money to buy Bitcoin? Because wouldn't that, in then theory, hurt the American dollar? Or do you think that's something where it's just a matter of time until that happens? Oh, here he is.
We'll get to that after.
Oh, you just tricked me. I guess this isn't it. Joke's on me on that one. So I guess we can continue that conversation. Do you think
Okay,
there will come a time when that happens?
I mean, if that happens, we're already in the end game of the dollar, and I don't think we're there yet. I think we're entering
Yeah.
what we call bimetallism. So if you go to the history before the US dollar became what we know and recognize today as the US dollar, the period of time before that, we had two currencies. It's what you currently see in El Salvador. It's what Argentina has lived with for most of our lives. And I know we have a lot of Argentinian friends here at Roxham TV, a lot of
Love
Argentines
them.
behind this. They've been understanding, and that's kind of where Argentina had a head start on this. They've understood that for them anyway, their own domestic money, their peso, was good for Coca-Cola, it was good for a cup of coffee, maybe lunch. It was not how you talked about the value of your home or how you talked about, your earning power or what you made or how much a car costs. So they existed in a world of bimetallism where they had one money for saving and for measuring things that cost a lot of money, measuring their wealth. No Argentine in the past 25 years has said, I have this many pesos, I'm rich. That would be ridiculous. They had to say, I had this much US dollar, therefore, I'm pretty rich. Or how much did your house cost, right? They're not capable of doing this with anything but the US dollar at the time. Now, Satoshi Nakamoto, whose hat I'm endorsing here as always, I believe fundamentally that the name Satoshi Nakamoto was chosen at the time Bitcoin was created in order to have the sort of moral authority to say to America, you're about to be what Japan has become. Your money is about to turn into an exhausted resource that no one believes or finds credible anymore and must be
Mhm.
printed like a defibrillator to keep the patient alive. And so the story of America transferring and hyperbitcoinization isn't a straight, like we don't go from the dollar straight to Bitcoin. I think there's a period
Sure.
in the middle here where assets, like kind of the proposal of Roxham with measuring global commodity markets and stock markets in Bitcoin and settling it on Bitcoin is a big part of this. So it's a part of
Yeah.
bimetallism. It's a part of switching from one money that's really good for coffee, one money that will be what the politicians ask for. Fiat, of course, means government declarations, government policy. It will be government policy money. It will be to make sure that the people who are being disintermediated by the changes that we're going through, because we got robots and we got AI and there's a lot of change coming. It's not just Bitcoin, it's happening everywhere. So you've got all
Yeah.
these people that are having to adjust and not really prepared for it. This isn't a blue collar revolution. This is for lawyers and for doctors and for people who didn't understand they'd be competing against protocols and information science and these types of things. So we've got big changes coming, and you're going to want some form of government policy to direct to the end of government policy, essentially, right? It's winding it down. So I imagine the minute they actually start printing dollars to buy Bitcoin, the game is actually up. Other countries can get away with it, but there is no other, there hasn't been another real fiat currency in the world for a long time. They all gain their value relative to the dollar. The dollar is kind of the benchmark of all of these other fiat currencies. And if you would remove the dollar and the US balance sheet, all of them would collapse. And so you've got this situation where I think it does all boil down to the US dollar and Bitcoin. I think the other fiat currencies, they'll have a chance to print their fiat to buy some Bitcoin, but that will sink them too. So I don't think we're at the point of printing dollars to buy Bitcoin yet. And in fact, a lot of what we saw from what Trump did with the White House thing already sort of tells the tale of this. The people not
Yeah.
invited to the White House summit 2 weeks ago were the Federal Reserve, were the federal regulators involved in the Federal Reserve system. The only people invited were from Treasury. And that's a sort of unseen battle that's going on in America right now, is that who is at the center driving the economy? Is it the Federal Reserve or is it the Treasury Department? In our Constitution in America, it's supposed to be the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department is supposed to be the one who sets interest rates. They're supposed to be at the heart, according to Alexander Hamilton, of how the system ought to work. The Federal Reserve System came up about 100 and something years ago and started altering this. Now, I don't, no judgment on what happened in the past. It's not important. It happened, and here we are. And that system is now, it did a lot for humanity for a long time, but entropy sets into these systems. As we heard from Michael Saylor at that White House summit, this is not a Metcalfe's law, of course, that went into valuing a lot of the companies that exist in Silicon Valley. The Square users underline the value of the network. What he says, it's a Newtonian network, not a Metcalfe network, not something that we're used to hearing in information and computer science. We think of these things as Metcalfe's law type networks, not physical networks based on Newtonian principles. So this whole entropy resistance piece of Bitcoin is what's important when you actually start talking about the degradation of the dollar, the entropy that's entered the dollar. It would be too much entropy into the dollar to start printing US dollars to buy Bitcoin. That's when we move to full hyperbitcoinization. It might happen one day, but the Treasury
Yeah.
can't do that. They can issue T-bills. Maybe they can do repo to buy them. I just don't think the mechanisms are there. The Federal Reserve is out in the cold. They were not invited to the White House. They're not going to be involved in Bitcoin buying. It's not on their balance sheet. It's on Treasury's balance sheet, right? And so we
Okay.
are seeing this battle between Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Yeah, it's an important factor. Where the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve sits as part of Treasury's balance sheet and not as we heard yesterday with Jerome Powell talking about the decline in the US balance sheet, because they've been the ones buying the government debt and sponsoring the US government through bond buying. It used to be foreign countries that wanted to manipulate the currency. China would show up, Europe, Germany would show up, they'd buy the T-bills. That's all gone. It looks like now the stable coins and the decentralization of the T-bill buying to sponsor the US government is a big part of this feature, which is why we saw Tether invited to the White House show 2 weeks ago and not the Federal Reserve. None of those people were invited. So a lot of people haven't picked up on that, but that's an important distinction. Trump did not invite the Federal Reserve System. He only invited Treasury, and that's why Scott Bessent was sitting next to him. Scott Bessent is the guy out there acquiring the Bitcoin for the United States, and he will be the guy with Howard Lutnick coming up with these revenue neutral strategies.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't sit in the Federal Reserve.
Gotcha. Now you mentioned so there's like a lot of change coming, and people. Speaking of people that were invited to actually to that summit previously, we had Michael Saylor, who will be a keynote speaker at the summit today, and he's kind of been on the forefront in terms of taking the lead on institutional adoption of digital assets. As we know, that guy hoards Bitcoin like a squirrel preparing for winter, right? Why do you think that institutions are finally starting to pay more attention to crypto? Is it actually like the institutions are leading the way and now the government can't ignore it? Or is it now the government is finally paying attention, so now other institutions are realizing they can't ignore it? It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll be a little philosophical. Maybe it's simpler than I'm thinking. But there has been, and I think this is what what kind of drew Michael Saylor to Bitcoin in the first place. That you had a lot of these melting ice cube companies that had cash flow, but then Wall Street worked with its sort of short attention span, maximizing return on stock, things like that, didn't really allow them to go outside of their purview and experiment and invest in R&D and grow the company in a healthy way. And there was a type of sickness that came in from, we live in a world where the best and brightest will go to whatever job that pays the best in their generation, right? Whatever job pays you the most money, you're going to go and do it. And we lived in an era where financial engineers were the best paying job and attracted the brightest human capital. All these really smart people descended on Wall Street and did these things. Now, it created a type of imbalance within Wall Street where you had all of these financial engineers operating for their benefit. Of course, for their benefit. I mean, we're all the same. We would all work for our benefit. It's nothing evil implied about working for their benefit. But what ends up happening is companies like MicroStrategy were left kind of in the lurch, where Michael Saylor was running a company that wasn't able to be really ambitious. They were in a lane. They would be punished for experimenting. But then he took a look at this infinite money glitch where he realized that he could start loading Bitcoin on the balance sheet and it would help the stock, which would free up his ability to do other things and experiment. And basically he was giving them what they asked for. You're in San Francisco. We were talking about baseball when we came on. It's a little bit like, remember when Barry Bonds watched Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire break the home run record back in, maybe you were too young, but in 1998.
Oh, it was 1998,
right?
1998 season, I believe, right?
1998 season, yeah. So
yeah,
it was 1998, exactly. So Barry Bonds that same year had a more impressive record than the 60 home runs in a season record. He did 400 club. So 400 stolen bases in his career and 400 home runs. And no one gave a shit. It was like stupid. So suddenly Barry Bonds went, you know what? If that's what you want, if you want home runs, let me show you something. And he started the juice, and his head size grew and his foot size grew. But it was a little bit of an FU to the system. Like, if this is what you want to be entertained, let's go for it. And he went to become a mutant and turned into the most feared baseball hitter. There'll never be anything like him.
Oh.
I mean, they pitched to him like 70 times in the year and he hit 70 home runs.
130 intentional walks that season or something, like crazy. Chicks take the long ball, like
yeah, there'll never be a hitter more feared with better stats. That is the ultimate baseball season by all measure. But it's the same, you know what, attitude. So that's a little bit like what Michael Saylor did. You know what? And so now that he's shown this glitch to the world, how can other people not notice, right? You get free money if you buy Bitcoin, your stock goes up, and then they give you more free money. And then you just take the free money and you buy more Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is decentralized. People worry about systemic risk because Michael Saylor is doing this, but you're going to see more and more copycats. You're going to see more and more, in the same way that the Berkshire Hathaway format had this really simple, right? A little bit against what I was saying. The best and brightest went into Wall Street to be salespeople. Warren Buffett for years was saying, actually don't follow them. There's no such job as stock picker. That's fake. Buy the index, go low IQ, just invest in companies that return a dividend, and that should be enough. And he was right. Very simple strategy. And the Warren Buffett strategy, which he sort of just ended with his letter 2 weeks ago, right? He's sort of starting to wind things down. It's the same idea here. Michael Saylor has sort of invented the new Warren Buffett strategy of just buy the market and
Yeah.
close your eyes, move on with your life, be good at what you do. And so the thing that he's teased out here looks like it's going to create a lot of copycats. We've seen Metaplanet dominate in Japan. I think we're going to see more and
Yeah.
more of these companies continue to dominate because it gives them it gives the system what it wants, and it shows there is an infinite money glitch out there. And so that's why it is. I mean, maybe a little philosophical, but that's what I see.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Oracle of Omaha. He has been quite the skeptic of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency world in general. Do you think there will ever be a time where he might jump in and put his toe in the pool as well? Or is this just well past his time? He's made his money and he'll never embrace this the way, like a Michael Saylor and some other, big institutions are starting to.
Yeah, hard to say. He's never gotten tech right, right? He's still into the cocoa, sugar water, and those kinds of businesses, banks,
Mm-hmm.
U.S. banks. So,
Here we
here
go.
we go.
Digital Assets
Donald's here.
Summit. It's an honor to speak with you about how the United States is going to dominate crypto and the next generation of financial technologies. And it's not going to be easy, but we're way ahead. Just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the first ever White House Digital Asset Summit, bringing together many of the world's top leaders in crypto for a conversation led by our White House AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, who's a fantastic and very brilliant guy. That same week, I signed an order creating the brand new strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile, which will allow the federal government to maximize the value of its holdings instead of foolishly selling them for a fraction of their long-term value, which is exactly what Biden did. He got a fraction of. We're ending the last administration's regulatory war on crypto and Bitcoin, and that includes stopping the lawless Operation Choke Point 2.0. Operation Choke Point went beyond regulation, and I mean far beyond. It was a form of lawfare through government weaponization. Frankly, it was a disgrace. But as of January 20th, 2025, all of that is over. I've also called on Congress to pass landmark legislation creating simple, common sense rules for stablecoins and market structure. Framework institutions will be liberated to invest in and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions in modern history. It's so big, it's, I think, as big as you can get. Pioneers like you will be able to improve our banking and payment system and promote greater privacy, safety, security, and wealth for American consumers and businesses alike. You will unleash an explosion of economic growth, and with the dollar-backed stablecoins, you'll help expand the dominance of the U.S. dollar, and many, many years to come, it'll be at the top, and that's where we want to keep it. We only want to keep it at the top, always. I can already see that the energy and passion of the community is the kind of spirit that built our country, and it is exciting to watch as you invent the future of finance. And right here in the USA, the good old USA, together we will make America the undisputed Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world. Thank you. Good luck. God bless America.
What'd you think, Nolan? I didn't hear anything too different there.
Yeah, that was cheerleader talk. But I mean, listening to him articulate alongside Bitcoin the talk that we just mentioned about decentralizing US debt, that's a big point. And it sounds like he totally understands it and is actually angling for it. So I'll go back to this idea of how do you sideline the Federal Reserve in a sense, right? We existed in this time where Treasury was subordinate to the Federal Reserve System. Again, against the actual original idea that we saw in the Constitution that Alexander Hamilton architected for America. Treasury was supposed to be at the heart of the American system. They were supposed to be the entity that sets the engine going for the national economy, and that's where the benchmark interest rate would be formed. That's not what happened. The Federal Reserve became, after 1913, the engine for setting the tone for the US economy. That's where the overnight rate between the Federal Reserve lending to the commercial banks is really the sort of foundation of the American economic system, the Federal Reserve system. That overnight rate sets the interest rates that people pay for their homes, their credit cards, everything like that. And so listening to him, now that's the issue. Under the Joe Biden administration, what ended up happening was other countries stopped buying our debt. The only way this system perpetuated was that the American dollar became the global reserve currency. That's what created this flood of high IQ people to Wall Street. That's what created the best paying jobs in the world. That's why they made so much money. That's how the American system was able to perpetuate. And we've heard many times about the Triffin dilemma. Max Kaiser will talk about it a lot. Basically, it means that when you have the global reserve currency, you have to run deficits because other countries are going to promote your own debt, right? They're going to want to buy your debt because they have bills to pay in your money. If they're going to buy oil, they need US dollars. They have an appetite for US dollars. They also want it at low interest. They want your currency to be overvalued so that you can buy their products. It's just a very predictable situation. That's the entropy that we were talking about. That's the Newtonian nature of these markets. There's just something that happens to it. So you start to see that happen. And now we're at this point where we would be stuck in an even worse environment if it was just the Federal Reserve buying the debt, because the Federal Reserve could then tell the Treasury at what rate they ought to be funding the US government. So instead of the overnight rate heavily manipulated by government bonds being sold into the foreign markets by foreign countries, buying those bonds, setting the interest rate, then the Federal Reserve lending the money over to the commercial banks. Instead, you'd have the Federal Reserve telling the Treasury, hey, raise those rates. Otherwise, I'm not buying your debt and I'm not funding your government, right? So you'd keep them sort of in control at this, of the system. What Trump just said there, now this isn't news, but I've never heard him articulate it like this before. This is why Tether was there and the Federal Reserve wasn't. Tether buys more treasury bills and funds more of the US government debt than Germany does now. Germany used to do a lot of this currency manipulation. I mean, America after the Second World War wanted these countries to manipulate their currency. They wanted Japan to manipulate the currency and Korea to manipulate the currency and Germany to manipulate the currency. It was part of building up the industrial bases of these countries so that they would be aligned commercially with America, and that we could get their products, help support their economic growth so that they didn't turn into crazy, samurai, Pearl Harbor bombers anymore. And they just made beautiful Toyotas, which we all love, right? We love Toyotas.
We do.
So, but there comes a time when Japan wasn't buying it anymore. That's what we've seen the past few years. China wasn't buying it. China has no interest in buying anymore. They've progressed beyond needing to do that. They can compete with Americans not in cheap products. They make better stuff. Have you tried some of these new Chinese cars? I mean, they're incredible. These, they're not as amazing as Tesla, but they're pretty awesome. I was in China recently, ripping around in these things. You got a beautiful one. I saw it everywhere in Dubai. It looks exactly like a Land Cruiser, an electric Land Cruiser. It's like 20,000 US dollars for this thing. I mean, we just don't have anything like this in America. And so they're ready to just compete without subsidizing the US dollar and all this stuff. So you need a new buyer. If you're going to perpetuate the US dollar hegemony, as he said, if you're going to be part of this bimetallism, if you're going to be part of what I'm predicting is the middle ground between the fiat era and eventually total hyperbitcoinization and the Bitcoin standard taking over the world, it's natural that we exist in a period of time when two of these things exist simultaneously. It's what existed before the Federal Reserve, and I think it's what is going to exist again now. You even see in a lot of other Trump's policies, right? Tariffs are really what defined the economy into the McKinley era. That's why McKinley Mountain is back. That's why it's the Gulf of America again. All of this stuff is a lot of fun, obviously, but that's the world we're headed into. We're headed into tariffs. We're headed into the best and brightest not necessarily going to Wall Street anymore because it's going to be even more basic. You were asking about the Warren Buffett thing. Yeah, I think it does fundamentally change. I don't know if Warren Buffett will ever catch on simply because he's heavily invested in Wells Fargo and these kinds of places, right? I don't know if Wells Fargo is going to make it. There's a big problem there. Good. So we'll see.
Now, you mentioned about, a couple things. First, total non sequitur trashed Biden in the first 60 seconds, so I won my poly market bet. I was really thrilled about that. But you mentioned about U.S. fiat, attracting the best and brightest, and now with Bitcoin specifically. Do you think that's something we could see into that market as well, as the best and brightest now going from traditional Wall Street to, you know, things like Bitcoin and companies that are utilizing Bitcoin to make new financial systems
Well,
or
I think we've
tools?
already seen that. I think that's
Yeah,
already been our advantage over the last few years because when you start to do the math about what happened after the financial crisis, right now I might use a bit of profanity now, so pause me if I'm
that's
being
okay.
too profane. But
Go for it.
the way I thought about it already at the time was when the minute they bailed out the banks and not, you know, normal people, in the
Mm-hmm.
2008 financial crisis, they
Yeah.
actually changed the risk management of Wall Street. And in the end, when you take the risk out, you turn it into pornography. You turn it into something
Mm-hmm.
without the real contact, without the real risks, right? When you bang for real, there's risks, right? You can have a baby, you can have responsibilities, you can get a disease, right? But some
Right.
people want to do it for real. There's a certain amount of pleasure that comes out of the real act versus watching a porno. And
Yeah.
they turned Wall Street, the real thing, into porno a long time ago. That's why Bitcoin, when I talked about those human capital migrations, we already absorbed the people who wanted it for real, who really wanted to make money, who really wanted to risk. You know, when you see Arthur Hayes, for example, uh, leaving Wall Street when he did to build BitMEX, an absolute casino, like no doubt about it. But it was a place to actually risk. It was cowboy culture, and it went to Hong Kong. And so there's already been, you know, when I worked on Wall Street for years, CoinDesk came out of New York. We worked under DCG. DCG was the original dealer of Bitcoin to Wall Street. They were the only, you know, it wasn't an ETF yet. They're the ones who sued to make the ETF possible, but they were dealing to accredited investors, the Bitcoin Trust, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, which is essentially an ETF, but only for rich people. But it's the same idea.
Right.
It's just a company that you stuff full of Bitcoin, and then you buy shares in the company, and then the price of the company, the value of the company, acts as a proxy for the Bitcoin price because all that the company is a stack of Bitcoin. So it was a rudimentary ETF before they were ETFs. They got converted into one of the ETFs. It's part of the ETF structure. And so, you know, when I was on Wall Street for those years, you know, you would go and, you know, one of my jobs was to sort of be a what is Bitcoin guy on Wall Street, like what's going on here, right? And so I would go with all these real kings of Wall Street. I would go to Morgan Stanley and BlackRock, right? I knew BlackRock was way ahead on Bitcoin simply because I was reporting directly to people that were dealing with Larry Fink. And I knew what they were questions they were asking. These were not idiots. This was the example of the best and brightest again. These were really smart people not asking stupid questions back in 2016, 2017. The same for Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan. You know, their office was right next to ours at CoinDesk. They used to invite me all the time. And I knew what Jamie Dimon was wondering about because I would know what his underlings would ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And these were very sophisticated questions. These were not like, what is Bitcoin? We're not doing one-on-one stuff, right? We're doing the real
Right.
thing. And so you already saw this was coming. You could already see. And so the point though is that when these meetings would end, I'd be dealing with these best and brightest that work directly for the Larry Finks and the Jamie Dimons. I would get an email in my email right after, hey, I want a job. Can you tell me where to work? I mean, this happened every time. This was the
Right.
normal thing to leave one of these Wall Street meetings, and the people who were already at the top were coming to you saying, "Hey, bro, get me a job." Like, so this has been going on for quite a while, and we've been living in this environment of the best and brightest migrating to Bitcoin for a long time. It's one of the reasons why we win. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to move so quickly. Bitcoiners, I'll take one Bitcoiner out of 100 fiat-minded NPCs, a million fiat-minded NPCs any day. One Bitcoiner can change the world to that extent. You know, I saw, where was it that I saw? It was an interview between Naval Ravikant the other day. Naval, who was a longtime Bitcoiner, the founder of AngelList, and he was on a podcast with a guy named David Deutsch. If you don't know who David Deutsch is, you'll remember briefly, quickly in Avengers Endgame, if you saw that movie. Did you see Avengers Endgame?
I saw parts of it. I'm not usually a big Marvel like
Yeah, okay.
superhero guy,
Well,
but I know of it
you don't
plenty.
need to know that. It was a throwaway line where Captain America goes to Iron Man, Tony Stark, and basically tries to pitch him on building a time machine. And Tony Stark says to him, "Hey, you solved the Deutsch equation or the Deutsch problem or something." I said, "What the hell?" I didn't know what it was. So, yeah, at some point I looked it up on the internet and I found out this guy David Deutsch was actually a cryptographer. He was one of the original quantum cryptographers. He's probably one of the highest IQ people in the world. Just a really brilliant guy. And in fact, I used a lot of his lines when AI first came about. People asking these questions, what's reality and all that. He has probably the greatest definition of reality I've ever heard. Again, about this Newtonian physics and entropy. He said, reality is simply just hard to vary truths. And that's it. It's just a hard to vary truth, right? Our truth, the definition of truth is a hard to vary statement about reality. Sorry, I had it backwards, right? I don't have David Deutsch's IQ. So a hard to vary statement about reality is the definition of truth in his mind, right? So hard to vary, it's entropy, right? Basically, that's what makes Bitcoin such an interesting thing, is that it's hard to vary. You can't. It's entropy resistant, which is what makes it Newtonian. But anyway, he was talking the other day with Naval, and they came up with this idea of what is wealth? What is actually wealth? How do you measure wealth? And David Deutsch's answer actually got Naval to completely change his mind about what wealth was. And Deutsch's answer was simple. It was your ability to transform the world. Your ability to do things that transform planet Earth that we live on is the sign of wealth. If you can, now you can trade money for things that you want to transform the world. That's one way, but that runs out at a certain time. And there's some people who just won't do something for whatever price. And talking about changing the world at the scale that Bitcoiners are talking about is an important thing. So the reason we've been wealthy is because there's a bunch of Bitcoiners that are able to change the way the world operates. I mean, just look at how far things have come. I mean, it's staggering when you stop and look at it, but look at the amount of change that we're having in the world. We're about to change the way Wall Street is architected. We're about to change the way the world works with money and our relationship with money. We're getting into like subconscious reprogramming of the human mind here. And this is big, big change. And that's what is being offered to us like this. So I think it's that's where I see it.
Yeah, and you mentioned changing the world, and some of the best and brightest. Our Lord and Saylor, Michael Saylor, is going to be up giving his talk here in just a minute. So I'm told we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back for that. More Blockchain Report live coverage of the Digital Asset Summit 2025 in just a few. All right, we'll see you in a sec, Nolan. Okay. All right, and we're back with more coverage of the Digital Asset Summit 2025 in New York with my good friend Nolan, host of The Great Awakening here, right on Roxham TV. So, Nolan, we're waiting for our Lord and Saylor, Michael Saylor, to speak. I'm going to keep saying that until it catches on. I think it's good. The Bitcoin maxis everywhere got to adopt it.
It's the first time
what
I've
do you
heard it, and I can see it catching on already.
Right, I hope so. That will be my one claim to fame that I leave in life. It'll be starting that name and then the little picture I always bring up our show of Donald Trump saying, "I love Bitcoins," when he signed the strategic reserve thing. So those are my two contributions to society when things are all said and done, or I'm hoping. So what are you expecting to hear from Michael? I mean, we all know he loves Bitcoin. He's about getting as much as he can, as fast as he can. What are your thoughts on what he's going to be talking about today during his keynote?
Well, so a couple of things I would say. I think we're going to hear more about the Newtonian physics versus Metcalfe's law. Now, I keep bringing this up because it's actually there's more to it than just, oh, it's some way of measuring the network and you compare them. So you're in Silicon Valley, you know the whole fail fast and break things idea, you know what went on there for years. We're living it. Yeah, we're living it.
Yeah.
But importantly, you know, the idea of consumer technology, the idea of, you know, there's an iPhone and then there's an iPhone 2 and there's an iPhone 3, 4, 5, and then we keep putting new iPhones, new generations. We saw it with Nintendo. Nintendo went on the same, you know, every bit of consumer technology we've ever bought has always been susceptible to a new generation of technology. So there's always been a 2.0. You saw another Silicon Valley guy, Jason Calacanis from the All In podcast, talking about, oh, Saylor is creating all this trouble for America and Bitcoin because it's, you know, oh, we're due for a Bitcoin 2.0. Listen, Bitcoin has resisted 2.0 since day one. Ethereum is susceptible to 2.0. Solana did that to it, right? Solana showed that every other blockchain has this susceptibility to performance metrics. It's fast, it's more performant. That's generally how you sell consumer technology, right? It's a 0 to 60, it's all these types of metrics. And so you're going to keep hearing that refrain. Now, when Michael Saylor talks about the idea of Metcalfe's law was a consumer technology metric. It helped us understand if you buy a telephone, it has no value. If two people have a telephone, then suddenly there's value because it's a consumer technology. The more people that have it, the more useful it is. Now, Bitcoin isn't quite that at all, right? It's that it is the longest surviving. Because the minute you want something as money, performance is secondary to, does it actually keep the value? Does it actually resist attack? Does it actually survive? Because you're in an adversarial environment. This is what consumer technology has never really underlined, right? You ship Zelda, you ship Super Mario, and there's a problem. You can send a patch and no one really cares, right? Glitches are in fact kind of fun when you find them in the game. I remember Mario Kart had all these glitches to get track records.
Jump over
right?
and Wario's
thing, over like, and get the record.
Wall.
Yeah. Everyone knows. Yeah. I got a 4-second lap on Wario Stadium. I have the all-time greatest lap ever on Wario Stadium.
Well, now you're just being boastful, but yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It was I did, because you could do the double on that track. You could jump the first jump, but you could also spin and you could ram your car against it, and sometimes it would glitch you over. And you know, I probably did that for like a month.
Rainbow Road shortcut, you hop off the track, get at the end of it. There was a whole bunch of stuff like that.
You got it. So it's okay to have these glitches in consumer technology. It's no big deal, right? Now, in an adversarial environment, which is what money exists in, you can't have them. You can't have entropy. You can't have mistakes. It's got to be what we call Lindy effect, right? You know, people say that's so Lindy now. Bitcoiners are already changing the way we talk about it, right? That's like a compliment in Bitcoin. Wow, very Lindy, right? That we were starting to use it as like a qualifier for how cool things are. That's so Lindy, right? Now, people don't realize Lindy is simply, it was the comedians that came up with it. It was comedians that went for coffee after their sets in New York City, and they were guessing about people's viability as comedians, their fame. And what they simply said is, if you've been famous for this long, you can expect to be famous for that long. And so it was about as much time as you could be relevant, as much time as you were useful for comedic purposes or funny or whatever, would determine how much time you'd be around for. And so people don't realize it came from pop culture. It came from enjoyment of things. It came from how much time people spend with things and how much they enjoy them. But it actually applies to these money systems as well. And the Lindy effect is really all that matters for Bitcoin. How long it's been around will determine how useful it is. So here, I think we're going to hear more about those things.
Very interesting. And you mentioned, like, we have a lot of versions, like Ethereum has a 2.0, or kind of get, oh, here we go. We'll get back to that.
And thank you to everybody in the audience today for being here. I appreciate it. I've followed the program for the past few days. It's been extraordinary, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to present in front of you today. I have, could we go back one slide? I have prepared a new presentation. A few years ago, I created one called the 21 Rules of Bitcoin. This one's the 21 Truths of Bitcoin. And preparing for this, I asked myself, what is true today in the year 2025? And perhaps what are the truths that the mainstream world, the mainstream media, traditional investors, politicians, people that are just getting familiar with Bitcoin, with digital assets, what is it that seems very, very clear that I want to share? So I gathered my favorite 21 truths of Bitcoin today. Bitcoin's an ideology. Freedom versus slavery. Innovation versus stagnation. Sovereignty versus dependency, property versus poverty. It's a very powerful ideology. It's spreading the entire world, and there would be no Bitcoin without the ideology. It's capitalism versus socialism. It's the individual versus the collective. It pops up throughout human history. We see these themes for the last thousands and thousands of years. You see these themes in the writings of the Austrian economists. You see these themes in the writings of Voltaire and the intellectuals of the 19th, the 18th, the 17th century. You even see these themes in the Constitution of the United States. The Founding Fathers had this ideology. And you'll see it echoing throughout Bitcoin. The second truth of Bitcoin is Bitcoin is protocol. Satoshi created a protocol based on that ideology. The 21 million coins, the block sizes, the 10-minute centers, the SHA-256 hashing. It was an integrated protocol. It's not the only way you could have done it, you know. You could have base 10 math, but you could have base 2 math. You could have English as a protocol, but there's also French as a protocol. Bitcoin's a protocol for prosperity. It's a protocol for economic success, economic empowerment. And that protocol lives on in the software. Oftentimes people say, well, what about this quantum thing, or what about that technology thing? And the point that I make to them is that English language is a protocol. If you have to upgrade the software, you'll probably upgrade the software, keep the language. Base 10 math is a protocol. If you have to upgrade the software, rebuild the computer, you'll probably keep the base 10 math. Bitcoin is a protocol. You may change the hardware, you may change the software, you may change the nodes. The protocol is simple. A bunch of intelligent people everywhere in the world would like to keep their money forever. Once $1 trillion worth of money flows into that network, they'll be looking to figure out how to keep it. And then when it's 10 trillion or 100 trillion or 500 trillion, you'll have a bunch of people speaking a language of economics, a monetary language. That is the Bitcoin protocol. Truth number 3, Bitcoin's an asset. One of those 21 million coins pops out. A lot of people just focus on the asset. They forget the ideology. They don't really notice the protocol. They think, do I have a Bitcoin or not? What kind of asset? It's the apex asset. It's better than cheese, it's better than palladium, it's better than gold, it's better than silver or copper or land or goats or cattle or lumber or pieces of paper that we call currency. Bitcoin is the asset, right? It is the asset based upon the ideology and the protocol that results in the greatest monetary premium in the world. Truth number 4, it's not just an asset. Bitcoin's a network. Bitcoin is not just a network, it's the network. It's the most powerful computer network in the world. It's a global network. Without the network, you can't have the asset. The asset is stored in the network. The network is a manifestation of the protocol. The network creates decentralization, that's true, but it also creates fault tolerance, mission criticality, redundancy, and all of the other technical, economic, and ethical qualities of the asset and of the movement. An ideology that spawned a protocol resulting in an asset that circulates on a network. That would be a simple articulation of what Bitcoin is. It's a truth. I would hazard to guess that the great majority of people watching the price of Bitcoin don't think about all 4 of those things. And they don't think about this as much as they should. Bitcoin is immaculate. Truth number 5. It was spawned by the Immaculate Conception. A nameless, faceless programmer gave it as a gift to the world. How do you create an immaculate thing? It's a God-given thing. It's a natural thing. We've had it since the beginning of time. No one took beneficial claim to it. No one asserts control over it. No one expects to cash in on it. The Immaculate Conception is an extraordinarily important thing to the network. That, combined with truth number 6, Bitcoin is ethical. What makes something ethical? What makes it ethical is you can take title to it, you own it, no one can debase it, no one can take it from you, no one can corrupt it, no one can control it. It's a thing of natural beauty. No country will ever trust anything that another country can debase or control. No company will ever trust anything another company owns or controls. No person will ever trust anything controlled by another person. In order to reach this great plateau of ethical, it has to be beyond the corrupting influence of any human, any man-made institution, any organization of people in the world. The Immaculate Conception was a necessary condition, but the engineering brilliance of Bitcoin was another condition. Right? Bitcoin's a perfect machine made of imperfect components. That's the brilliance of the engineering. Can you make something that can a human being make something that other humans can't corrupt? Bitcoin's ethical. Truth number 7. That makes Bitcoin a commodity. What is a commodity? An asset without an issuer. Gold's a commodity. Corn is a commodity. Lumber is a commodity. Why is this important? Because in law, commodities have a special status. A company in the United States can be capitalized on commodities. It cannot be capitalized on securities. There's actually a special carve-out in corporate law for publicly traded companies. But maybe more importantly, I can stand here and I can tell you that I think the price of Bitcoin will go to 13 million over 20 years. I couldn't say that about a security, right? You have legal immunity to actually express your opinion about a commodity. That makes commodities politically superior, legally superior, ethically superior, financially superior to a non-commodity, to a security. And it's not just a little bit better, it's 100 times better, right? And so Bitcoin is a commodity. Bitcoin is actually the commodity. I studied commodities in my early professional years. Every other commodity can be created with technology, with capital, with know-how. If you were going to take your family's life savings and buy a commodity to hold for 100 years, and you thought about it, would you buy soybeans or corn or oil or natural gas or lumber, coal, silver? Well, no, they're all awful, and you know why they're awful, because it's pretty obvious to you that 100 years ago it was harder to make those things than it is today. And if the price of oil goes to $1,000 a barrel, we're going to frack it, triple frack it, hyper frack it, and we'll drive the price of oil down. Same with gold. There's been hyperinflation in gold multiple times. You know, the California 49ers found gold. We created so much gold that we crashed the economy of Europe. Every other commodity is going to actually explode in supply with technology and with price. That makes them all garbage investments for a long-term investor. They're, in fact, the worst possible investments as a long-term store of value. The king of them, gold, still underperforms the S&P index by a factor of 2 or more. So there's only one commodity in the history of the human race that wasn't a garbage investment. The one commodity is Bitcoin, right? A digital commodity. And let's talk a bit more about that. Why is it not garbage? Why is Bitcoin great? Bitcoin is a digital commodity. Every other commodity I can name is a physical commodity. Physical commodities are God-given, and anyone in the world can create them. Digital commodities were created by the brilliance of human beings in a fluke. You needed to have a brilliant engineer, Satoshi, give away this gift to the world. The world needed to embrace the gift. The protocol needed not to be defective. And after many, many years of not knowing whether it was something or nothing, it spontaneously monetized and came to life. It really is a miracle of the 21st century. Why is a digital commodity important? Well, you can vibrate a digital commodity 60 times a second on a computer. You can move a digital commodity at the speed of light. The AIs can decompose and recompose a digital commodity millions of times an hour, simultaneously moving it and distributing it all around the world at the speed of a computer. Can't do that with palladium. Can't do that with gold. There's no way Apple Computer's ever going to ship an upgrade that has multi-factor authentication on a physical commodity. It needs to be a digital commodity, and that's what makes Bitcoin special. Not only is it a digital commodity, it is the digital commodity. The most profound thing that happened is 2 weeks ago, the president signed into law via the executive order, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. David Sachs said, Bitcoin is an asset without an issuer, spawned via an immaculate conception. It is decentralized. We recognize it as a store of value. It is our digital gold. You have the most powerful person in the world and members of the cabinet that are saying that it's the policy of the United States government that Bitcoin is the one digital commodity in the world. That's going to ripple. And, you know, I can create a digital commodity, theoretically, an asset without an issue, and I can give it a protocol that inflates it 5% every year. I could create any kind of inflationary monetary protocol. For example, corn and oil are commodities. No one doubts the fact they're commodities, but they're not scarcity. They're not capped. Bitcoin wasn't just a brilliant creation of a digital commodity. Bitcoin was brilliant because Satoshi capped the supply at 21 million. If I give you an inflation rate of 2% and the supply of gold, the economic half-life of your wealth is 36 years. When I give you an inflation rate of 0% in your digital gold, the half-life of your economic wealth is infinite. It is forever. The difference between 2% inflation and 0% inflation is you're dead in 36 years with 2% inflation, and you live forever with 0% inflation. Next time someone tells you that it's just a little bit of inflation and the 2% doesn't matter, I just want you to think about that, the half-life of 36 years versus the half-life of 1 billion years. And of course, with that observation, it stands to reason the next truth is Bitcoin truly is digital gold. Gold, what does it represent? Gold represents money and wealth in the human race for 10,000 years. It represents prosperity. It represents the king commodity. It represents the most ethical, virtuous, technically sound money. And the vast majority of the people in the world, they're not invested in digital assets. They're not invested in Bitcoin. They don't even know what we're doing here. You're probably, you know, if you lined up 100 people on the street, you know, to say that you're the top 1% is probably an understatement. You're at least ahead of 99%. So for the mainstream, when you say digital gold, what that tells them is that instead of giving away a gold medal at the Olympics, maybe it's time for a Bitcoin medal at the Olympics. What it means is that the golden age will give way to the Bitcoin age. What it means is a city with streets paved in gold maybe should be paved in Bitcoin. What it means is that if something is gold-plated, and that's how you monetize anything, a gold-plated lighter, a gold-plated pen, maybe it should be Bitcoin-plated, right? This is a very profound thing, right? The truth, Bitcoin is digital gold. We dismiss it as being kind of a boomery idea, but the boomery idea means Bitcoin's worth more than 20 trillion because that's what the gold is worth. But the truth is everything digital in our modern era is worth 10x the analog version. If Bitcoin is nothing more than digital gold, Bitcoin is worth $200 trillion if it's nothing more than digital gold. But of course it is more than digital gold because truth number 11, Bitcoin is digital money. JP Morgan said gold is money, everything else is credit. Money, a bearer instrument. I give it to you, I don't have it, you have the money. Well, Bitcoin is money. What is everything else circulating in the internet? Credit. What does that mean? It means that I send you something, I send you a fee over a credit card network. 45 days from now, maybe it will be transferred to your account after the credit card company takes 2%, right? In a world of digital credit, that means that it takes 4 years for the money to move 40 times, and at the end of the 4 years, all the money's gone. In a world of digital money, it means you can move the money once a second. Maybe you can move the money 60 times a second. You move the money 60 times a second for a 20th of a penny, you still have the money. The computers are not going to think one click, one settlement every 30 days. They're not going to agree to pay 200 basis points per vibration of the money, right? Digital money is profound. It's so profound that everybody in the business of managing money doesn't even understand what this means. When they understand what this means, then the industry is going to 100x. Bitcoin is going to go to the moon. Well, if Bitcoin is digital money, what else is it? Well, truth number 12. Bitcoin is perfect money. Okay? What is perfect money? If you read the writings of the Austrian economists, von Mises and Hayek, they write about money, but they couldn't conceive of perfect money. Voltaire, Aristotle, Plato, they couldn't conceive of perfect money. Why? They didn't have the technology. It's kind of like asking Aristotle, tell me about clean water. How do you understand clean water if you don't have a microscope and you don't understand that there are pathogens in the water? Nobody understood perfect money until Satoshi gave it to us, and that's because it was impossible to create perfect money before modern semiconductors, modern internet, modern cryptography. So they were struggling, and you can see Hayek and von Mises, they struggle with this notion. In the Constitution, the founding fathers, who were pretty intelligent, said, the only legal money in this country is going to be gold and silver coin. They kind of knew this idea, a commodity in your hand, a self-custodied commodity bearer instrument felt like good money. What they designated as perfect money in the Constitution, and we have drifted, a little bit away from that, They designated what they saw were the hardest commodities and the most liquid fungible commodities that could be used as a monetary token. And they were never perfect because you can't practically do every transaction by swapping gold and silver coins. And because gold and silver coins aren't hard capped, they have inflation. So they had defective money that was slowly decaying, that was not quite useful, but it was just, you know, they used to say it's the worst possible way to do it except for every other way, right? And so the significance of this truth, this basically marks the point where economics goes from being a superstition and an art form to being a scientifically based engineering discipline. You can't engineer an economic system or a monetary system before you have perfect money. It's just like trying to do good math, but 2 + 2 = 5 on Tuesday, and it equals 4 on Wednesday. And if you don't have stable numbers, you can't do math. And if you don't have stable money, you can't do economics. You know, if you can't drink water that's not going to kill you, life is pretty ugly, right? This is profound truth. Again, misunderstood. No economist trained in the past 100 years. They never took a course on perfect money. They never imagined it. But you can't really blame them. It's like if you went back to Voltaire and you said, okay, that's the smartest guy in the 18th century in France. And, you know, he wrote shelves of books. But like, you know, poke him and say, describe, you know, radioactivity to me. And how are we going to build mobile phones and satellite communications? And he would have thought, what are you talking about? Right? It's like the most brilliant person without the instrument, the technology, can't conceive of the rational thing. And that takes us to truth 13. Bitcoin is legitimate. A short phrase, a powerful phrase. It wasn't legitimate 4 months ago. A year ago, if you try to remember where you were and what you were thinking in March of 2020, when the entire crypto industry was under massive onslaught, everybody's getting sued, right? And the most likely future was everything gets ground into the dirt. We have completely come 180 degrees. This is the most powerful person in the world, sitting the most, flanked by 2 cabinet members. Bitcoin is digital gold, a store of value, a commodity. Not just a commodity. You know, if the US seized 10,000 securities, all your artwork, all your houses, your planes, your trains, your automobiles, every currency, you know, everything of value, your diamonds, your gold brooches, your silver, they'd sell it. Right? The only thing the United States does not sell is its national parks, its nuclear stockpiles, and its Bitcoin. Now, that's a shockwave that will be heard around the world. That just happened, you know, literally days ago. It's going to take a while for that to ripple through the entire federal government. Then it will ripple through the state governments. Then it will ripple through the banking system, the insurance system, the credit rating agencies. Then it will ripple to all the banks in Mexico and El Salvador and Argentina and then Europe. It's rippling through the banks in Hong Kong and China and Japan and Abu Dhabi and Europe. How long will it take? Well, you know, how long does it take for a profound good idea to move its way through layers and layers of bureaucracy? It'll take a while, but the innovators will actually grab this, and those that need the money, that want the money, will reach for and embrace the money, and they will be enriched by it, and there will be others that will resist it. But that entire shockwave, right, that explosion in legitimacy, that happened just a few weeks ago, happened on a Thursday night in the White House. And that's profound. We are, and as I've said before, if Bitcoin's not going to 0, it's going to 1 million, right? It's either nothing or it's something. And if it's going up. And truth 14, Bitcoin is corporate. You know, I talked a little about corporate law. I'm very sensitive to it because I ran a public company for many years. We came public in '98. Every public company in the world is capitalized on one of two things. You're either going to capitalize on short-dated treasuries or sovereign debt, in essence currency, or you're going to capitalize on a commodity. Well, it turns out that every commodity other than Bitcoin underperforms the S&P index. It doesn't beat the cost of capital. So capitalizing upon silver or gold or palladium or oil makes no sense. There is one commodity that you can put 100% of a corporate balance sheet in. And that one commodity is a digital commodity, and that digital commodity is called Bitcoin. And so what does it mean? It means that for the first time in 100 years, companies can recapitalize, and they are recapitalizing. And what does that mean? That means a company starts by sweeping a little bit of excess cash, and then cash flows, and then it sells some equity, and then it issues some debt, and then another company follows, and another company follows. Right now, there's about 80 companies that are starting to buy Bitcoin, and there's probably 80 ETFs. We're going to see another one every week, and another one every week, and pretty soon there'll be hundreds. And those hundreds become the gateways for hundreds of trillions of dollars of equity capital and fixed income capital to migrate into the entire digital assets economy. And you can see it right in front of your face. You see a company like Metaplanet goes from one hotel being worth a few $1 million to being worth $1 billion in 12 months. Where does it stop? It's not going to stop, right? If you're legitimate, you're corporate, right? You're going to see a transformation of mainstream organizations. The 15th truth, Bitcoin is global. Everywhere in the world I go, I meet someone, and they say, well, thanks, thanks because I bought a Bitcoin for my daughter, or I bought a Bitcoin for the family. We appreciate what you're doing. And you know what I say? I say thank you because I appreciate what you're doing. Bitcoin is global, Your Apple stock isn't. Your land isn't, right? The artwork that you hold isn't global. Right? Bitcoin is a global asset. It means somebody in Nigeria buys it, and they're getting the benefit of entrepreneurs in Manhattan. And it means someone in Arkansas buys it, and they're actually in an economic relationship with somebody in Singapore. Right? This is not a lowest common denominator thing. You own Arkansas real estate, no one's going to fish you out of that investment. You own Bitcoin, you bury it in your backyard in Arkansas, and you'll wake up in 30 years and find out that someone in Tokyo or London made you rich. Right? This is the global asset. There isn't another asset that trades on Wall Street that is global in the way that Bitcoin is. And it's not just global, it's immortal. We're stretching in time and space. Show me an asset that stretches to every part of space that truly is global, Bitcoin. Now show me one that I can see into the next 100 years or 1,000 years. There's nothing else that you own that's going to last 100 years, right? Your warehouse will have to be redone. Your artwork will probably have to be restored, right? What company would you think is going to be around 200 years from now, right? The real beauty of Bitcoin is the elegance of the protocol is all you're doing is buying 1/21 millionth of all the money in the world forever. Okay, when is that going to obsolesce? Like when are you not going to want to own 1/21 millionth of all the money in the world forever, right? It's not like iPhone 99. It's not like, getting the next upgrade on the whatever gadget, right? Bitcoin is immortal because the idea is so timeless and so elegant, and the network is just virally going to spread. It's a life form. And if it's immortal, it means you can actually think 200 years in advance. No company expects to live more than 10, 20, 30 years. Everybody's short term. It takes me to truth number 17 is digital energy. A calorie is organic energy. A Satoshi is digital energy. If you want the AI, if you want to put life in cyberspace, if you want to bring an AI life, you have to imbue it with digital energy. Then it comes to life. Then it thinks. Then it lives. Then it procreates. Maybe it lives forever. You can't, anything that is funded with digital credit is just a shadow. It's, you know, it's a shade. It's a ghost. If you want something to be a true life form, you have to put real energy into it. I've said many times before, Bitcoin is a conservative asset. I give it to you. I don't have it. It implements conservation of energy in cyberspace, but the more important point is it's going to bring life to cyberspace. Truth 18, if it's digital energy, then Bitcoin's a digital energy network. How do you vibrate energy, right? How do in a rapid, at the speed of a computer rate, how do you bring the entire world into that relationship? You can't do it with a credit IOU, and certainly you're not shipping gold from New York to Tokyo in a second. Which takes us to truth number 19. If it's an energy network, Bitcoin is a digital economic system. How do you post $10 million for 5 minutes, you know, with a company across the country and fetch it back? How do, you know, vibration, how do I give it to someone, take it back in 18 seconds? How do I swap a capital asset for a currency asset? We see this in DeFi, right? I'm swapping Bitcoin for stablecoin for Bitcoin, but think more broadly, right? Think about a world of 1 billion robots talking to 1 billion AIs that are thinking at the speed of the computer, that want to actually transact millions and millions of times an hour in time and space. They're going to do it with a digital energy network. And that takes us to truth 20. If it's an energy network, I can reverse it. Bitcoin becomes a digital defense system. Bitcoin is the most powerful network. What's the unit of power? The exahash. If I actually place graphic wall behind that wall of digital energy, then I can secure a system, authenticate a system, defend a system, potentially even attack a system. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of your airspace. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of outer space. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of cyberspace. You know, control of the digital power network, the mining network, the hash network is control of the ability to move energy and capital from point A to point B. Control the network, control your destiny. Lose control of the network, you lose the ability to engage in digital commerce. Maybe you lose the ability to secure your cyber systems. It's a defense system. And with that, I'll end with my final truth, truth 21. Bitcoin is an energy system. Everybody says it's a network, and then they go, yeah, I read something about Metcalfe's law. And Metcalfe's law is like knowing enough to hurt yourself. It's not a Metcalfean network. It's a Newtonian network. Bitcoin is an evolving network. Think a star system forming. There is matter, there is energy. It's the brightest thing in the financial universe. It's got a magnetic field. It is slurping energy, capital, into the magnetic field. There are objects in orbit. They're falling into orbit around it. All of you are in orbit around it to a certain extent. Every company, every country, every actor. It is getting more powerful. It will continue to get more powerful. It will continue to get brighter, right? A Metcalfean idea is like a little asteroid went past on the left and a white dwarf went past on the right, and they're both equal. Well, they're not equal. The white dwarf is going to suck the atmosphere off my planet, and the little asteroid is irrelevant. It's like a cute little shooting star. It made a little spark for me, right? This is not a little Metcalfean network. This is a network where when someone brings $1 billion to the network, it matters. When they bring 10 billion, it matters more. When they bring 100 billion, it matters more. The more capital, the more energy that flows in the network, the more powerful, the greater the gravitational field. Eventually, anyone in the orbit, right, has to adjust their trajectory in order to accommodate that gravitational field. You see this thing coming to life in front of you. It's going to have Newtonian dynamics, and it is an energy system emerging. And these are the 21 truths. Thank you for your time. And please go tell someone the truth about Bitcoin.
To join Michael Saylor in conversation, please welcome Pete.
All right, Nolan, first thoughts of our Lord and Savior's keynote speech. What'd you think?
I think you had it perfect with our Lord and Sailor. I think it's going to catch on. That was very preachery. We're getting into the religious vibes, which we love, right? And as I mentioned, the Immaculate Conception and the idea of the Newtonian network versus the solar system, and the Metcalfe law versus the that was his last point. So I'm glad it made it to the conclusion. And I was getting worried he wasn't going to say it, and then it was the kicker at the end, you know.
Oh, that was more than a kicker. You nailed that one right on the head. I mean, you were talking about it earlier. Literally his last point, kind of summation of the whole thing. Really interesting talk. I mean, is this kind of what you expected from Saylor, or were there any surprises in there?
Well, I'd say your Lord and Sailor introduction was the surprise. It is absolutely his stuff is getting to the cosmic, let's say. It's getting to the preacher stuff, which we love, right? Because again, like he said about capitalizing companies and what it means, and I think he even said exactly what I said earlier about this is so big that it's hard to get your mind around. And this idea of the scale of change and the scale of what's going on, what we heard from Peter Thiel this summer and what I mentioned about the debt and the size of change we're going through, these things are just too complicated even for the 200 and something IQ people. This is at the scale of a solar system. This is emergent life of some sort. And to hear it go that far, this is something that people in the early days of Bitcoin, when we talk about, even amongst Bitcoiners, like maybe you're going a little too far. But to see it now happen at the highest stage with a real Wall Street guy, a real founder, to see it now perpetuating from cabinet members, the president of the United States, to the intro to this talk. I mean, it's manifesting some real change in the world. I remember I mentioned earlier about that David Deutsch thing, that your ability to change the world is actually your sign of wealth, right? It isn't how much money you have necessarily. Wealth is more like how your ability to transform the way we live and the way we go about this stuff. Original alchemy was about that, right? Alchemy, when people tell you it's about lead to gold, that was a scam so that the Spanish Inquisition and the Inquisition that was going on in Europe didn't come down on them. They created this fake cutout version of what alchemy was. Truthfully, alchemy was about manifesting wealth and gold just through your own intentions, a lot like what Saylor said here. So he's going full alchemist. He's going straight to the alchemy. He is talking about manifesting a whole new way of organizing human life. He's talking about a lot of the things that might seem mystic at once, but they shouldn't be. This is all, I think, pretty normal stuff in the end. Alchemy has been going on forever. Getting to a useful money for humanity has been something we've been thinking about for a long time. I'll always recommend, personally, I've always believed Nick Szabo had a huge role to play in Bitcoin. What it was exactly, I don't know. I read the language and I hear Satoshi's voice when I hear Nick Szabo. Not that I want to, unmask Satoshi or anything like that. I just think Nick Szabo, who understands the history of money real well, when he wrote his History of the Money piece in 2017, the guy who's interviewing Michael Saylor right now, Pete Rizzo, and I were in an office in New York City. And at the time, whenever Nick Szabo wrote something, it's like everyone would just pay attention. It was like 20-something pages. I think all of us that afternoon were just sitting in our computers like, what's going on? And that's where we're at, right? This long quest that we've been on to come up with the perfect system. It looks like we're there, and watching Michael Saylor sound kooky, but like all of us, is a lot of fun.
I mean, hallelujah, brother.
Exactly.
Nolan, it's always a pleasure.
Lord and Saylor.
Lord and Saylor,
It's gonna
keep
catch on.
spreading the gospel. Spreading the gospel, brother.
Tell your friends about the truth of Bitcoin. And I also like, talking about the truth. I'm glad I got the David Deutsch quote out that
Yeah.
truth is really hard to find, hard to vary statements about reality. And that's in fact what Bitcoin is. It is a hard to vary statement about reality. We
Hmm.
all, through its decentralized nature, you can't argue with it. It's probably the only thing in the solar system that isn't just observer oriented. It does have this sort of post quantum aspect to it. We all can converge on the idea of what happened on the Bitcoin blockchain. I start my Great Awakening show every morning laughing at data scientists just because, like, data, data, like, come on, give me a break. It's ridiculous. We got to go on vibes. It's all vibes, except Bitcoin. It's the only data worth a damn. It's the only data you can actually trust. I personally don't trust scientists unless they hold a lot of Bitcoin, because in the end, they're probably too poor to tell the truth. They're probably subject to some form of coercion and probably believe their own lies, right? But if
Yeah.
you need a paycheck and you live like that, then that's what's going on. There's probably 10 scientists worth a damn in the world, which is a depressing thing to realize, but it's the money that's actually created this corruption of the system. We need scientists who don't have to worry about US aid funding or wherever their next paycheck is coming from, that are doing it for the objective benefit of humanity. The truth is, it's hard to get scientists to get science to prove cause and effect. It's a rare thing in nature. A lot of correlation out there. Bitcoin can actually help fix these systems. That's why the Bitcoin fixes this meme that you come to after you get to the 21 million meme, and the don't trust verify meme is also important, because Bitcoiners are able to imagine a much better future where we can fix science, we can fix data, and it's an asymmetric advantage that we have. I would take, like I said earlier, one one Bitcoiner over a million NPCs, simply for what Michael Saylor is doing here. Go out and teach people about Bitcoin, change the world. That's what you do every day here on the Blockchain Report, Hank. You're out
That's
there
right. That's
fulfilling
right.
our Lord and Sailor's mission to teach
That's right.
people about what's going
I'm
on.
just a humble servant of our Lord and Sailor, as we know. Nolan, they want us to go to, speaking of which, he's preaching some more gospel right now, so they want us to go over to that. But as always, thank you so much for being on the show today. You are an absolute wealth of knowledge. And check out The Great Awakening if you haven't already, every morning at, 9 a.m.? 8 a.m.?
8 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Eastern time.
8 a.m. Eastern. Awesome. Thanks, Nolan. It's been a
Peace.
pleasure. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Take it easy.
All right, let's get back to our Lord and Sailor. Let's do it.
Technology companies are going to create tens and then hundreds of trillions of dollars of value. It will flow into the Bitcoin network. So the opportunity is simply buy as much of it as you want to own, and then allow the passage of time to enrich you. And then I think the threat is, right, the risk is, don't buy it. How would you feel if your enemy made $80 trillion and owned the network or control the network? The worst would be they make 80 or 100 trillion, they control the network, they own cyberspace, you don't. And I would say the best analogy, and this is manifest destiny in the United States. When Thomas Jefferson was president, he had an opportunity to buy Louisiana. We didn't have the money, but it's not that complicated. You're on the East Coast and you look west and you think, do I want to allow the French, or do I want the French to sell this to the British, or do I want it to be sold to the Spaniards, or do I want to own it? So we bought it, and then we moved on to take control of and take ownership of Texas, and then the West, and then California. And where would the country be if, like, California was owned by the Spanish and a third of the country was owned by the French, and we had been responsible in not taking risk? And so the answer is, it's the future, right? You may not, you could say, well, I live in New York City. I don't think I live in St. Louis or San Francisco or LA. It's like a hard wagon ride from here. And you would be right, but you would be wrong. Of course they want to live in San Francisco and LA. You just got to look out far enough. And I would say, I think people in this room know this, but the average of the normie would say, well, wait, I can't live in cyberspace. I can't live in a digital energy network. It's like, well, maybe you can't, but the AI can. the thing that you create that's going to take responsibility for all your family's money, that's going to make you rich, it will live in cyberspace. It will look at you and say, are you crazy? I can do things 1,000,000 times a second perfectly, 1,000,000 times more efficiently there. But you want me to actually, trade copper tokens, at the speed of sound or something, or less than the speed of sound. So the future is there. The economy is going to go there. You can buy it. You can buy it for a nickel. We bought 80% of the United States for $40 million, 80% of the country. And I think there's an equivalent opportunity right with Bitcoin. So it's something you do it either because it's a good opportunity, or you do it because you wouldn't want your worst enemy to do it to you.
Right. Well, you put a number on the goal you have for the United States. You'd like to see the United States own 5 million Bitcoin, about 25% of the network. Do you have a sense then of how much of the Bitcoin supply could be owned by governments? If there's a geopolitical order that comes around Bitcoin, how much of the supply would be owned by just the totality of governments?
Look, I think Bitcoin is perfect money, and it's the most profound opportunity of the 21st century. And the rich, the powerful, the comfortable, and the arrogant have no need for it. So I think the most beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's money there for the taking. If you want money, if you need money, if you're willing to take the risk, if you're at the beginning of your life cycle, if you're in your youth, America was a youthful country. If you're a youthful person, a youthful family, a youthful company, if you're an ambitious country, then it's there for the taking. I can't really tell you, and the beauty is Satoshi gave sovereign money, which means that the rights of a cab driver in Nigeria are just as powerful as the rights of the United States, in Foggy Bottom. So will the Bitcoin be claimed by individuals? Will it be claimed by corporations? Will it be claimed by nation states? Will it be claimed by institutions? And the answer is, I don't know, and I think that Satoshi just kind of gave perfect money to the world. Those who can overcome their arrogance, who need it, will see it for what it is, and they will claim it. And then others will be comfortable in their 20th century existence, and they will dismiss it as a nuisance. And I've said sometime before, the volatility of Bitcoin is a gift to the faithful. The complexity of Bitcoin is a gift to the faithful. Because if it was simple, and if it was non-volatile, someone with more money than you, that's arrogant, that doesn't need the money, would have it all, and you would have none of it. You would have no opportunity. So I think it's in everybody's best interest that it remain a little bit complicated, a little bit volatile, and then the greatest nations of the 22nd century will embrace it. There was a time when the Chinese outlawed explosives and gunpowder, and the Japanese thought that was a good idea too. Right? And it lasted for a while until people that thought that explosives and guns and gunpowder and technology were an okay idea showed up and made them change that. They toppled the governments, and they were dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th century.
But I guess, is there a number that scares you or might worry people? Because there are people who are worried about how much government involvement there is now in Bitcoin. So is there a number that there is no number, it sounds like, that changes how you think about Bitcoin in terms of how much governments could acquire, with China now looking maybe to respond to the US?
I put my trust in Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is going to evolve in a very dynamic, very healthy fashion, because it's the most ethical, the most open, the most ethically sound, the most powerful light in the world. There's going to be nation-state struggles, but it's possible all nation-states ignore it, and it's companies that fight over it. It's possible that companies ignore it, and it's the individuals that fight over it. But I think I talked about ideology, right? Bitcoin is the triumph of the natural law over the artificial law. It's a triumph of the natural versus the artificial. Right? And natural law says what naturally should happen will happen. and those that are arrogant and foolish will dismiss it and they won't benefit from it. And I think that as, the question is, worried that the U.S. will embrace it, or am I more worried they will embrace it? The truth is, if the U.S. embraces it, it will inject virtue and natural law, and respect for property rights and freedom and economic balance into the U.S. government. So I think any organization that embraces Bitcoin is made more virtuous, made healthier, and made more rational. And I think in that way, I don't really worry about, it's like with banks, right? Am I worried about banks embracing Bitcoin? No, the banks would be more rational, and they would be more equitable, and they would be more ethical, and they would be more secure and probably better actors if they embrace Bitcoin.
Well, certainly there's a lot of organizations here. I want to call back a few of your recent statements and just talk to the startups and the kind of innovators who are in the audience about what opportunities you see. Obviously, you delineate between Bitcoin and the crypto ecosystem beautifully, but recently you've said that you see digital currency as being a $10 trillion opportunity, digital securities as a $10 to $20 trillion opportunity, and then digital tokens as a $10 trillion opportunity just for America. In the past, you've maybe been more critical of these projects. Can you talk about what opportunity that is? What is that opportunity, and are you interested in it?
Yeah, I posted this on my X profile on highlights under a digital asset strategy, which I presented to the president in the White House a few weeks ago. I think that the great opportunity here is to define an asset class, the digital token, and I think the digital token ought to be an asset with an issuer that has some utility that stops short of being. And if that's the case, why can't 40 million businesses issue a token with some utility to create capital? I think digital tokens for capital creation and for innovation. And as long as you're civilly and criminally responsible for the damage you do, as long as you don't lie, cheat, and steal, I think that there ought to be a massive token economy that explodes. And that'll get us to 10, 20, 30, 50 million tokens, and many will fail, but some will succeed, and then the world will get very interesting. I think that the brutal fights over the last 4 years were because we only had securities and commodities. I think that that's a false dichotomy, and there will always be confusion and controversy until we create a new set of assets. The digital token ought to not be a security and not be a commodity. It ought to be an asset with an issuer. And if the issuer takes responsibility for creating utility and for not lying and cheating and stealing, then you've unleashed the opportunity for 400 million businesses to raise capital and innovate. I think digital currencies ought to be designated as such, which is an asset with an issuer backed by currency. And I think that should be a competitive market. And I think that if digital currencies become competitive, I think things like the dollar will spread to be a $10 trillion asset, right? It's right now, Tether is successful off the point of demand for it without being, endorsed legitimately by the U.S. government. If the U.S. government let a bank offer you a digital currency that gave you 400 basis points of yield, the demand would go up by a factor of 100, right? And the big winners would be the U.S. dollar and the issuers, and then most of the weak currencies will be replaced, and the U.S. will export its currency to the world. And I think the U.S. can export $10 trillion of U.S. dollars, but it has to take the AML, KYC friction off, right? It needs to be a digital currency that we can trust that moves at the speed of light and vibrates 1 million times a second and goes through 100,000 layers in an hour. That's what's best for the U.S. dollar, and that's what's best for the economy. And if you take that same idea to securities, why can't you tokenize Apple stock or a share of ETF? And if you do that, we will export trillions of dollars of our securities to the world, and then people will start to create intricate instruments to tie currencies with securities, with commodities, with tokens, and then you'll see $100 trillion of value created through innovation.
Well, winding down here, talking again about this currency securities tokens aspect of your framework, are these opportunities for strategy? Who are these opportunities for, and then who can gain from these opportunities in your view?
I think there's 400 million companies that would like to raise capital. I think the token is an opportunity for any company that ever wants to raise capital or create something new and innovative in cyberspace. I think that the digital currency opportunity is going to be for regulated banks and big corporations that are, that can file audited statements and get the trust of the financial regulators. I think digital securities, any company that could issue a security might get into that space, but it's like for the ETF providers and companies that are regulated entities. So what I see is Bitcoin as the king commodity. I see 100 digital currencies. I see thousands or tens of thousands of digital securities. And I see millions and millions of tokens circulating, all of them on 24/7, 365 crypto exchanges. And all we're waiting for is that digital assets framework to be written into law by the President of the United States. When that happens, there's a Cambrian explosion of all these assets, and it'll start in the US. It will ripple out to every other country in the world. Everybody will copy the US. And if the US does it right, then all the entrepreneurs and all the capital will come to the US. And of course, that's the vision of the Trump administration and this industry.
Final question, Michael. You talked about the 21 truths. Are there still things that you're learning about Bitcoin yourself personally?
Every single day, I'm learning something new and elegant and beautiful and wonderful about Bitcoin. I think we'll never completely understand it. It's like the mysteries of the universe unraveling themselves to an astrophysicist. It's a lovely endeavor.
Michael Saylor, Executive Chairman of Strategy. Thank you all for watching.
Well, boys and girls, that was a wild one today. We got a lot to talk about on tomorrow's show, including more discussions about what happened, what did Donald Trump say today on his little piece about Bitcoin going forward. That's exciting. We're going to have more news on the XRP lawsuit getting dropped by the SEC and much, much more on a more traditional episode of the Blockchain Report coming to you all tomorrow, same time, same place, right here at Roxham TV. In the meantime, always make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxham TV and Hank at Roxham TV on all platforms so that you can stay up to date with all the latest and greatest in Bitcoin and crypto news. Until tomorrow, stay safe, stay informed, and always, always HODL on. I'll see you boys and girls tomorrow for more Blockchain Report. It's broken. That's okay. See you guys tomorrow.